A demon grabs the nun's chest and licks her cheek with its tongue. The nun is violated by the demon. Amniotic fluid breaks out in the blink of an eye. Her belly swells several times its size, giving birth to an evil baby. This is the latest horror film, The First Omen. The Roman Catholic Church has been using an unnatural method to impregnate women. The woman gives birth to a daughter, who has grown into her teens. Father Brennan knows they must find this girl, but Father Harris wants to end it all. They have a dispute at the church entrance. A construction worker above them makes a mistake. A metal rod pierces through the stained glass and heads towards them. Brennan covers his head and avoids the shattered glass. Harris seems unharmed, but when he turns around, Brennan suddenly makes the sign of the cross with his hand. The metal rod slices through Harris's head. In 1971, an American nun named Margaret is sent to Rome to serve the church. Cardinal Lawrence personally comes to pick her up. The beauty of Rome excites Margaret, but the protesting crowds on the streets also make her somewhat annoyed. The cardinal says, "The world is changing rapidly. Young people no longer seek our guidance. They not only protest authority, but even despise the church." Later, the cardinal hands Margaret over to Sister Silva. The other person is the abbess. She has 62 nuns under her. Because the convent has a contract with the government, they accommodate many unmarried pregnant women. The convent also has a maternity ward in the medical area. They take care of these pregnant women diligently. During their conversation, the noise of children comes from nearby. Sister Silva asks Margaret to explore freely. She goes to check the situation by herself. Margaret pushes open a wooden door. She sees a girl sitting on the floor drawing. She greets the girl. The girl suddenly crawls towards her and hugs Margaret's head and licks her. Sister Silva hurries over upon hearing the sound. She introduces the girl as Carlita. She has some mental issues. To prevent Carlita from harming others, she is kept locked in a room. In the evening, the driver takes Margaret to the dormitory. After Margaret packs her belongings, she begins her evening prayers. A shadow suddenly appears at the door, and someone is turning the doorknob. Voices can be heard from behind the door. They say, "Margaret is a naughty child. She needs to be tied to the bed." The next moment, a nun suddenly jumps out from the corner. Margaret is startled. When she regains her composure, she realizes that her roommate, Luz, has returned. Although Luz is a novice nun, she has a bold and lively personality. Before becoming a full-fledged nun, she wants to indulge in life and enjoy life to the fullest. Luz is very curious why Margaret came to Italy to become a nun. Margaret explains, because of Cardinal Lawrence, who used to be a priest at the orphanage where she grew up. Margaret used to have a vivid imagination and often saw strange things. The nuns at the orphanage would punish her because of it. It was Cardinal Lawrence's appearance that saved Margaret, but is that really the truth?
He really helped me to see that all that stuff was just in my head. Things got a lot better for me after that.
Regardless, Margaret's new life at the convent began quickly. Margaret was somewhat concerned about Carlita. That evening, she noticed Carlita's bed was empty and went to the confinement room to find her. She saw Carlita being locked in bed by a nun. Before Margaret could take another look, the old nun closed the door. Shortly after, a nun named Angelica peeked out from the hallway. There were still tears on her face. Before Margaret could react, Luz dragged her back to the dormitory. Under Luz's influence, she changed into a provocative dress, and they went to a bar together. Dim lighting. Margaret felt lost in the crowd. Fortunately, a gentleman named Paul was there. He kept Margaret company and chatted with her. Encouraged by Paul, Margaret finally stepped into the dance floor and enjoyed herself. The next day, she woke up, completely forgetting what happened the day before. Margaret felt a surge of guilt. While she was sitting in the square repenting, Father Brennan suddenly appeared. He reminded Margaret to stay away from Carlita. "If you want to know the truth, go to room 42 at St. Lita's convent and find him." Margaret didn't listen to Father Brennan's advice, and the next day she went to find Carlita. She learned that Carlita was locked in the confinement room because she bit the old nun. When Margaret was at the orphanage, she was punished by the nuns all the time, so she understood how Carlita felt. She told her, "We didn't do wrong. It's not us, but the nuns who force others to obey." Just then, a scream came from the maternity ward. Margaret rushed to see what was happening. She discovered a laboring woman giving birth. The painful screams and bloody scene made Margaret faint. She struggled to recover from the shock. The nun named Angelica died in front of everyone. Due to the frequent strange occurrences at the convent, Margaret went to room 42 to visit Father Brennan. Father Brennan showed her a photo of a baby girl. It turned out, the child created unnaturally by the church was Carlita. Father Brennan also told Margaret, Some churches outwardly follow Christian doctrine, but behind the scenes, they turn a blind eye to abuse and sexual assault. As time progresses, most people distance themselves from the church. A small group of influential priests and cardinals believe that people no longer have faith because they haven't experienced darkness. So, to save the current situation, they seek to strengthen the church's authority. They firmly believe that they can bring forth the Antichrist through the nun, allowing him to bring back dark forces, to influence the world, and compel people to return to the church. And Carlita is the vessel for conceiving the Antichrist.
Listen to me, Margaret. There's a beast they're making. A jackal. That's the father.
To verify this speculation, Father Brennan instructed Margaret to steal Carlita's birth records. If she was born on June 6 at 6 o'clock, it would prove that Carlita is indeed the vessel. The next day, the people from the convent went to attend an exhibition and encountered a rioting procession. Margaret got separated from Carlita in the crowd. People around her kept pushing. Someone grabbed Margaret with their hands and licked her cheek with their tongue. Margaret felt an unseen demon entering her body and soul directly. The malevolent aura seemed to seep into every pore. Sister Silva noticed Margaret's strange condition and called her to the office. She warned Margaret to stay away from Carlita and postpone her vow-taking ceremony. In the evening, on her way back to the dormitory, Margaret saw Paul again. She wanted to catch up and ask a few questions, but Paul ran away upon seeing Margaret. Unfortunately, he got hit by a car while running. A man severed into 2 pieces. Before dying, he only left some words, "Find the mark." Margaret returned to her apartment. The next day was the day of Luz's vow-taking ceremony. Under the blessing of the cardinal, she officially became a nun, dedicating her life to serving God and being his bride. Meanwhile, Margaret took advantage of everyone attending the ceremony and sneaked into Sister Silva's office. There, she found a key under the desk, but didn't know which door it belonged to. Margaret noticed the misaligned features of a baby on the wallpaper. She carefully observed behind the wall, and indeed discovered a hidden door. Margaret used the key to unlock the door, and entered the dim and narrow basement. She searched through the drawers, and found Carlita's records. Indeed, the girl was born on June 6 at 6 o'clock. In the Western culture, 666 refers to the devil, Satan and Antichrist. It seems that Brennan's speculation was correct. In addition to this, the drawer also contained other records of Carlita, but most of them were stillborn or deformed fetuses. The church conducted multiple experiments to create a vessel, and all the experimental subjects were called Carlita. The only one who survived was this Carlita No. 14-inch in the convent. Margaret carried the records and left the basement. She rushed into the crowd and pulled Carlita away, trying to protect this poor girl. However, in reality, Margaret couldn't even protect herself. Sister Silva pinned her down on the ground. Carlita tried to come to her aid, but she was caught by the clergy when she opened her mouth to scream, revealing the demonic mark on her upper jaw. The nuns locked Margaret in a confinement room. Underneath the carpet, she found a painting left by Carlita. The paintings were eerie and terrifying, seemingly depicting the process of nuns conceiving with demons. In a state of mental confusion, she also saw the burned body of Angelica. Her beautiful face had been destroyed by the fire, and emitted a putrid smell. Terrified, Margaret held her head and screamed. The janitor priest heard the sound, and hurried to rescue her. After seeing the records, he understood what had happened. So, he pulled Margaret out of the convent. The two of them sought refuge with Brennan, and spent the night studying the files brought by the janitor priest. They discovered that the church was eager to produce a male infant, but only female babies were born, and all of them died prematurely. So, the people in the church believed that by allowing a demon to mate with Carlita, they could give birth to the Antichrist. Margaret pulled out that old photograph. She suddenly realized a question. The baby girl in the photo had a demonic mark on her forehead, but Carlita's was clearly on her upper jaw. Could it be that the person in the photo wasn't Carlita? The few of them quickly searched through all the records. They discovered Carlita No. 5 had not died prematurely, and her identification photo had been torn off, which means the baby girl in the old photo was not Carlita No. 14 but No. 5. The church had successfully conceived 2 children. Amidst their shock, Margaret couldn't help but recall what Paul said before he died about finding the mark, and pointed towards the forehead. Margaret immediately inserted her fingers into her hairline, searching. Sure enough, Margaret was Carlita No. 5-inch. Actually, on the night she got drunk and lost consciousness, Paul had taken her to the church, where she endured the violation of the demon. The demonic fetus had already formed inside her. With June 6, 6 o'clock approaching, Margaret had to remove the child from her body. The three of them immediately headed to the hospital. They had a car accident on the way. The driver died on the spot. Margaret crawled out from the back seat. Her body was already out of control. Amniotic fluid quickly broke through. Margaret's belly instantly grew larger. The church authority figures appeared. When she regained consciousness, she found herself tied to an operating table, with a row of surgical instruments nearby. A doctor grabbed a knife and cut open her abdomen, while clergy members formed a circle. Margaret felt like a farm animal giving birth. The doctor pulled out a mass of flesh from her belly and cut through the flesh. To their surprise, there were actually 2 children inside. It's even a boy and girl twins. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief. They finally got the desired male fetus. This child will lead the church to restore its rule. Margaret requested to hold the baby. The nun placed the male infant in her arms. Little did they know, the next moment, Margaret grabbed a surgical knife and stabbed Father Lawrence to death. Immediately after, she aimed the blade at the baby in her arms. However, faced with such a young life, she couldn't bring herself to do it. While Margaret hesitated, Sister Silva took the child away. Meanwhile, Luz stabbed Margaret with a knife. Then Sister Silva ordered to set fire to burn Margaret and the baby girl to death. The fire quickly spread. Margaret held her daughter and awaited death. Unexpectedly, Carlita suddenly rushed in, trying to pull her out of the fire, and Margaret looked behind her. She saw the father of the child burned by the fire. As for what exactly the other person was, only the church members knew. On the other side, Luz carried the newborn Antichrist, heading to the U.S. Embassy. Tonight, the wife of the U.S. ambassador to Rome is about to give birth to a baby. Their goal is to switch the babies, so that the Antichrist is born into the most privileged family, and inherit the false father's power and position. Only in this way will the forces of darkness spread faster, and that baby girl is raised by Carlita and Margaret. Many years later, Brennan comes to visit. He reminds Margaret to be careful. The church already knows about your existence. That child shouldn't have survived.
They've even given it a name. Your son, Damien.
The movie ends here. The overall story is similar to Immaculate, but the audio-visual language and sensory stimulation are taken to another level. Although the theme is religious, the core of the story is childbirth horror, focusing on female childbirth fear and self-awareness, and political metaphors for the overall environment. The actresses' performances are outstanding. There is a scene that pays homage to possession, which pushes the atmosphere to a climax. But the most horrifying scene in the entire film is the close-up shots of childbirth that make people uncomfortable. If you enjoy my channel, please give me a subscription.